All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to, this is going to be our last conversation with an editor for 2023, at least. I don't have any planned for 2024. So, Brittany Klingsheim. Did I say your last name right? Oh my gosh, because
You
I've been
actually
calling
did.
you Brit Kling because that's your pro name that you go with, right?
Yes.
For editing. So Britt and I met a good long couple of months ago, and I just love the way she approaches clients. So quickly, Britt comes from a background in with an editorial background. She's got a degree in journalism and communication studies. So do I. Mine's from Concordia. Where's yours from?
Sacramento State University.
Cool. She's worked in a newspaper in editing there, and she officially opened her editorial business, Bookish Bee, in June of this year. But she was working for free for years. So well done on becoming like valuing your time, because this is such an important job. And since opening her business, she has worked on 19 books, over 1 million words, published words, and with best-selling authors, even New York Times, USA Today, and
Mhm.
Wall Street Journal best-selling authors. So I'm going to pass it over to you because this conversation I'm really excited about it. And folks, if you have questions, drop them in the chat, and some of them I'll ask, and others I'll ask you to come on camera if you're okay with
Okay.
that.
Awesome. Well, hi everyone. Thank you for taking the time to come listen to me talk. um, so what Danica is discussing and the way I approach my clients, I really focus on relationships, hence the name of this. And I wanted to make sure that I was really understanding authors as they were coming to me and needing assistance with their manuscripts. And this actually doesn't have like the happiest of beginnings. Coming from a journalism background, my editing style is very neat, concise, not verbose, very rules based. APA is very strict on how everything is obviously supposed to look. And so when I first considered editing, I started off doing a lot of ARCs and just doing stuff for free. And then I finally got brave enough and was like, hey, I want to do this for real. Like, I think that we can do this. And I had an author give me a lot of advice. And then a year later, I opened my doors and I got my first yes. I was like, awesome, let's do this. And gave it my all. And she was unhappy. And I was floored because I could not believe, like, I knew that I did a good job. And I'm not trying to sound very proud, but I am a good editor. I know what I'm looking at, I know what I'm doing. And it wasn't my skill, it wasn't my ability. It was, I didn't understand what she was trying to accomplish in her manuscript. And she also had very strong opinions about grammar and punctuation that aren't typical to what the standard rules are. And by missing that mark, I completely alienated her and made her feel like, basically, I felt like she felt I eviscerated her manuscript, which was farthest from what I would ever try and do. Because at the end of the day, I feel very strongly that as authors, you know your story, you know your voice best, and it's the editor's job to work within your voice and your story and not kind of always try and fit the mold of what it is supposed to be. And so from there, when she told me how upset she was, and like it was ready to be done at that point, she was so upset. And I said, no, I am so sorry that I missed the mark. I'm so sorry that you are just really unhappy with me. Please teach me. What did I do wrong? Why are you so upset? And how can we move forward? And I just continued to ask for clarification. And thankfully, she was kind enough to be like, okay, here's where you're missing the mark. Number one, here. Number two, here. And she made this list. And I said, okay, let's do this again. You have another book, let's do it again. And I just kept very open lines of communication. And from there, this light bulb went off and I said, oh my gosh, this is going to be every single time. I'm going to have an author that thinks differently and wants a different thing. You know, copy editing and line editing and proofreading actually mean different things to every single author you encounter. And they have different goals with what that is. Please excuse me 1 second. Yeah. So my
I've
Google
even
Doc was
encountered that editors
Mhm.
don't all have exactly the same definition of line
Absolutely.
development copy. It's really fascinating.
It is, especially because you have like the EFA and you have all sorts of organizations that tell you what these things are. But even then, I feel like it's very kind of effervescent. Whatever people really decide that that's what they're going to offer in their package, that's what it is. And so after we worked through these couple of manuscripts, I built this Google form that I'm going to show you guys. And it's always changing every time I encounter an author and they give me feedback. And I'm like, wow, maybe somebody else would feel this way about this word, this type of sentence structure. Let me add that to my Google Doc. And so I'm going to share this with you.
While we were just getting ready to meet or to open up the room, Britt and I were chatting about literacy right now. And I learned something from her. And I think this might play into folks. You can think about this while you're reading this doc and while Britt is talking. Britt shared that parents are letting Siri and Hey Google and those bots read bedtime stories to their kids, which is to me really interesting. And I think because we were talking about how kids learn to read, and these are our next readers, the next generation coming up who might be reading our books, who are struggling with reading because they're not looking at words. And so that plays into potentially maybe some of what Britt's going to talk about around our words that we use in our books and the reading level that we're writing at. We can come around to that if anyone's interested. There you go. Over to you.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So I send this out to all potential clients that want to. It's part of my process. It wasn't always on form. It used to be something in a Google Doc that I copy and pasted and sent in an email. And I found that a form is just much more efficient. A lot of this stuff in the very beginning is not relevant. It's just all of the extraneous details for going through. But starting off, one of the things that I like to ask, and I'll share this after, because I know if I share it now, people will just look at it and not. But I will share this form if you want to look at it to get an idea. But, one thing I've encountered is commas. Some people feel very strongly about keeping them, even if it is not appropriate. Like you don't always put a comma before and or because. And some people don't prefer to have them in their introductory phrases. It's all about their voice. And while I feel strongly that we should be following the rules of grammar and syntax, maybe your author voice doesn't. So that's just somewhere that some people want to use that as natural pauses in speech. Some people want to be most grammatically as correct as possible. So we just go through there. A pet peeve of mine is unnecessary prepositional phrases. And that is something that I encourage authors to remove if they are willing. A lot of the time, that action is already implied, and there's a lot of extra it can create a redundant sentence.
Can you give an example of a prepositional phrase?
Prepositional phrases are anything when you are given direction. It's your look over, look up, look using the word of. I think in grammar school, they use the example of anything that you can do around a plane. So you are above the plane, under the plane, over the plane, in the plane, on the plane. So anything that you're doing, but if your main character has an action that they're doing, a lot of the time that's already implied. The reader can already see it. And so when you have this action happening and then you pause to go looking above the stars or whatever, that's already implied. And so I talk with my hands and I'm sorry, I'll try and keep them down. But it adds to wordiness, and some prepositional phrases are absolutely necessary, but a lot of the times they're not. Or even just the single word preposition can be a little bit distracting, and just it's a flow thing. And so that's something that I often encourage people to remove. And you'll notice that your sentences kind of just, they go, there's not that stop and or that redundancy that can be distracting. Um, a lot of One other thing is a demonstrative determiner. These are your that, this, these, those. They're often unnecessary. I use the example in my document here. I can tell them that I just want to see how other people live. When you can remove the that, I can tell them I just want to see how other people live. It's very subtle, but that is a hard consonant word. It's going to be something where you stop and it reduces your flow. And it's an unnecessary word. It's a filler word. So it's something that you can remove that often I feel like does not affect artistic voice. Some that's are necessary. I do put them in where, because once some of my authors have done this, they start to self-edit them all out. And some of them are necessary. You do need that directionary term, but in general, a lot of them can be removed. Article usage is extremely common in people that speak more than one language, specifically a language other than English. And they're tacked on to nouns and they're really not necessary. Obviously, when you're in the fantasy paranormal realm, there are objects of importance that you.
Someone else,
You have
I
a
just
question?
muted somebody.
Oh,
Someone's,
okay.
yeah.
No worries. And so those are also things that as a reader, I find distracting. And so as an editor, if it's not necessary, and this maybe comes from, I actually doesn't even maybe, it comes from my journalism background. We had word limits. And if there was a word that could be removed, it was gone. But it also helps with flow. If you have an unnecessary word, take it out. As long as it's not taking away from your story, it always helps with your flow. Repeats. This is a really funny one. Some people don't care. Other people's really do. I have one author that takes it to a very strong level where it's every time that word shows up, I highlight it and I go, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 20, 30, 40 times you've used this in your document. And so, and some of it's necessary. Like if you have if your male main character is chuckling every time he laughs, you just think of him as your chuckler. And you're just like, man, does he not do anything different? And so it's important to make sure that we're varying our word choice. Is he laughing? Is he smiling? Is he doing anything different than chuckling? And so that's just something that you would hope that your editor is catching for you, because it does make for a boring, repetitive read for your readers.
I just want to pop in, put in the
Yeah.
chat if you know what your repeat word is. When I first started my first manuscript, my characters shrugged like all the time, constantly shrugging. And subsequent to that, I got rid of that one. And it's funny, it's like once you know what your crutch word is or action is, you can catch it before you write it. But in my next book, it was back. The hero leaned back, she fell back. Everything, like the word back was in there probably, I mean, it was a ridiculous number of times. So Jeanette says hers is now. Colette says her characters are always sighing. You know what, Jeanette? That's another one that I often use, now, comma, blah, blah, blah. Well, I did when I was doing not a lot of nonfiction writing. Now is one of those words that I use in creative nonfiction. Colleen's got a lot of smirking going on in her
Yes.
stories.
Smirking is popular with our men.
And Ashley drops the F-bomb. That, sometimes that may be a little different. That's funny. Shrugging, nodding, sighing. Two characters who don't talk very much, says Ziona. That's funny. And that is a big one. Okay, for Jillian. Anyway, yeah. So it's great that you're all aware of some of those words, and it'll be interesting to see what an editor points out to you that you're not aware of, like me. Okay, back over to you.
Well, and what's funny, Danica, is it will actually change from book to book. And I have an author, the one that cares the most, she's very aware. And so it's a joke. It's what's my phrase? What's my thing for this book? And the most recent book I just did, it was perched.
Oh,
All of her, every time her characters sat anywhere, they perched on the end of the bed, on the chair, on their desk. Everyone was perching. And that's such a strong word. I was like, we need to change this. Everybody's perching like they're a bird. Let's find normal places to perch, and then let's find a different word to replace perch. And then glancing was her other one for that one. They glanced over. And so it's really fun to try and brainstorm normal words, and then you're going through and you're like, okay, I used glanced 62 times in this section. Let's try and figure out where to remove glance and find different words. Um, Something I do, and I would encourage as authors for you to ask from your editors, is leaving comments as they read. And this is something to do to hype you up. It's, hey, I loved this section. Oh my gosh, I felt it. You made me cry. You made me laugh. Authors, you need to know when you're evoking the emotions. You also need to know that you're evoking the right ones. Maybe you didn't want me to laugh. Maybe this was really serious and I have a dry sense of humor. And to someone else that has a dry sense of humor, that might not come across the right way. So you need to workshop that. Also asking them if they can point out things like, why is this happening? Why did your character do this? This is incongruous to their character up to this point. Some editors consider this an extra service. I don't want to touch on that, but if it's something that they're willing to do for you, I would encourage you to ask, even if it's as simple as, hey, if something really touched you, can you just like make a comment, say with an exclamation point or a question mark if something confused you? They don't have to do a lot of extra work, but it helps you develop your writing in a way that you are wanting to develop it, regardless if you're doing a developmental edit or not. So this is my biggest section, and I consider it the most important. When I have a repeat client, I keep a file. They don't have to answer this every single time, but this one section is something that they do have, that I request. I don't make anyone do anything. I request that they answer this every time. And it's, is there anything you want me to know specifically about your book characters and plot? I had a very sweet newer author want to, thinking that I would like to be left in the dark. I don't. Tell me all the spoilers. I need to make sure your foreshadowing is leading to what you want it to. If it's too strong of foreshadowing and it's obvious, we need to fix that. And so make sure your editors understand some of your characters, your main character, what's driving them. It doesn't have to be long, but just a little bit. So especially if this is not someone you've worked with a lot, they know where you're going and why. I really want to know if you've struggled with something. Is it a character you really couldn't flesh out their motives? Or is it a plot point where you just got stuck and then you pushed through and you don't know if it actually works well or not? Tell me so I can say, hey, yeah, that actually worked. You did just fine. Or no, this feels clunky and just out of the blue. Readers are going to go, this is left field. What happened? And so that way, as your editor, even if they don't give you everything, they can at least tell you yes or no. And that way, you know, to go back through and kind of massage those areas. I want to know that if you did a developmental edit or you had some beta readers, what were their thoughts? Did they tell you, what did they love and what did they not love? And did you change anything based off of that feedback, or did you leave it? I still want to know. I'm nosy. I'm nosy. I want to know all the things. And then lastly, I want to know, what goals did you have when you're writing this book? Is there anything specifically that you would like to achieve with your writing other than just entertainment? And if you don't and you're just trying to entertain, totally fine. But I want to know that. Or is there something you're trying to shine a light on that is really important to you as a passion project? I want to know that too, so I can tell you, hey, you hit the mark, or no, you need to expand upon this. And so that's something that I really think as authors, when you're shopping around with editors, these are questions that you could modify for yourself to say, hey, how do you feel about these kinds of things? Are these things that you look for as an editor? And if that's not something you're worried about as an author, fine. But if it's something that you would find value in, finding an editor that's willing to create this relationship with you. Because once we get through this form, you're a little bit annoyed with me. You're like, man, I spent a lot of time doing this. But at the same time, I've not had an author feel like I can't achieve their goals and help them achieve their goals by doing all of this with me. And through this dialogue, I'm able to form relationships where when you're writing your sequel or your next book, you talk to me and you're saying, hey, do you remember this scene? I want to address it and we need to move forward about it. What do you think about this? And it's just a relationship where we can continue helping you build your writing. It's not, I don't stop at just editing. I do want to be a part of your creative process, however that looks like for you. I'm always asking if there's anything editors have done that you loved or hated. Um, Again, I'm nosy, but I also really want to make sure that I'm being the best service provider. Um, as an editor, I try really hard to remember that I know a lot about the rules of the English language. I don't know anything about your story. I don't know anything about your characters. You are the expert, and I need to respect that. And compassionate, constructive criticism is key. Um, and I've found that a lot of authors have very sad stories of editors that think they know more and just lay on this heavy hand. And so I want to know if that's your experience because number one, I want to love you more through the editing process and be gentler, like because it's a bad experience can ruin it for everything. Um, so yes, that is my really long-winded
That was not
Google form.
long-winded at all. That was fabulous. Do you want to stop sharing screen so we can have
Yes.
conversation?
Let me stop share. There we go.
Ta-da. Huh. That just seemed so, it was almost intuitive. Like, I know it's not intuitive. There's a lot of thought that went into that form, but the questions felt so obvious because they make a lot of sense to be asking. And yeah, like you really hit home on my very, very, very first editor was one of those who said things like, your character, well, like she said horrible things. She was, basically your character is too dumb to live. And the character, because it was my first book, like many first books, that heroine had a lot of me in her. So that was
Mm-hmm.
really destructive to my
Absolutely.
to my everything. And I was, even though I had already spent at that point 15 years as a career technical writer, like I'm confident in my writing, but that hurt and put me back many years. So thank you for loving up authors who have been,
Absolutely.
yeah, had the trauma, the editor trauma. It's real.
Yes.
Oh,
And then just to my last thing on that whole subject is once I've gone through an edit, uh, my first and second edits through an author, I will always at the end, I tell them I'm approachable and I am coachable. If something I did does not work for you, please tell me why. I have a second feedback form that's also obnoxiously long, asking for what did I do well? What did I not do well? What would you like to see more? And too much feedback is detrimental. As authors, you get lots of feedback from everyone. But if there's something that consistently I'm hearing back from that isn't working, I want to implement that. Or if it's just something very minor as far as my approach, the way you would like me to tell you things, that I would like to change that for you in a way that way you can receive criticism and critique on your writing in a way that still makes you feel strong and as the author rather than feeling like you have someone. This is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong.
fantastic.
So that's the end of my spiel on creating a relationship.
All right. Well, so do folks have, I love that. I have my editor. I went through, I can remember two, and there might have been a third before I got the editor that I believe I will work with forevermore because she gets me, she gets my books, and we've developed a friendship through editing because because you want to like the person who's on your team and is
Yes.
that close. It can be quite an intimate relationship because you're being your most vulnerable to them, to your editor,
Mhm.
or allowing yourself to be vulnerable with them. Do folks have questions for Brit? You can pop them in the chat. Let's talk about, come back to this thing that while folks might be typing. Reading levels. So
Mhm.
you were mentioning specific words. I know I have a friend who writes, I believe what she writes is upmarket women's fiction, and the reading level I feel is quite high. Um, they're harder books to finish because they require more concentration. What are you learning from the New York Times, USA Today, and Wall Street Journal authors about the reading level of the books that they're giving you to edit?
Well, like we were discussing before, they are all written very much at that third and fourth grade level. A lot of very basic, easy to read, easy to follow language, not a whole not a whole lot of multi-syllable words. And just really focusing on the ease of writing. I was sharing, I was fascinated. I had an author who is one of those best-selling authors who had learned through a workshop that the word frown was no longer was considered a word that people couldn't understand or they couldn't visualize. And so she went through to change all of the instances of frown to actually describing what was happening to the main character or the characters' faces that were frowning, saying that their brows were furrowing, that there's creases in their foreheads, that their, mouth turned down. So I'm constantly, like you said, constantly learning different things as well. But it's definitely learning from them, specifically my New York Times best-selling author. She uses very, very normal, short, easy to read words. And I can tell you for sure, I don't think there's a 3-syllable, 4-syllable word in her books, period.
Wow.
And, but they're still entertaining, they're still engaging, but there's just not a whole lot of like even the word enlarged, like it's just, you don't need that word. And I only bring that up because I was reading something else I was editing something last night and the word enlarged came up. And I was like, is that one of those words?
Right.
As authors and readers and writers, we look at language so differently than the average person picking up a book. And we have to remember that and kind of check ourselves. It's like these words are normal conversational words in our vernacular, but it's not for the average person reading. And so that's something that definitely we have to be paying attention
Mhm.
to.
And it seems getting worse. So Ashley asks, is there anything you feel strongly about when editing that you urge authors to adhere to?
So I don't 100% know what you're trying to get at with that question. I will say I'm very adamant that that you are adhering to your voice and that you're not taking too much feedback from unqualified people. I have an author that I've been working with right now, and she's seeking out beta readers and she's seeking out other people to and alpha readers. And those things are absolutely necessary when creating your process, but you need to make sure that you're seeking out, and this maybe isn't an editing question but this is part of the writing process. I feel like that's important. You need to be seeking out qualified people for that. You're not just looking for your friend, your neighbor, those kind of people that are either going to rah you or even tear you down like, ooh, maybe you wrote some spice in that book and your friend is not a spicy reader. You've just alienated them and hurt that relationship. So when you're looking for, I really urge authors to, when you're looking at that process, if you do seek that out, that you're adhering to your own voice, but taking in that criticism gently and with a really critical eye. But my other main highlight things that I worry about as far as from an editorial standpoint is looking at your prepositional phrases, your determiners. Do you have any dangling modifiers? which a dangling modifier is where you start to describe something and then you go, they did that. And you're like, well, you just listed 3 different things in this previous sentence paragraph. What did they do? And so making sure that you're not leaving your verb without any attachment to it. So you're understanding what happened with that verb. The sun just came through my skylight and it's making me, oh,
It's right.
and then just, yeah, I don't feel very strongly about, and I'm different. So definitely don't take my advice as the end all be all, but I'm not really strong about making sure you're sticking to a specific manual style or anything like that. And I know that's kind of taboo. However, I think that at the end of the day, if you're looking at a lot of these big authors, none of you guys were thinking about, am I following Chicago manual style? Is this MLA? And you are relying on your author. But unless you're telling your author what style you really want to be adhering to, nobody cares. Your readers don't care. Your publishers aren't thinking that deeply about it. They will tell their editors in-house, this is what you want to do, and they'll make it fit. But you don't need to be worrying about that. And I know that's something that gets brought up in circles.
Cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any genres that you feel most comfortable editing or that you specialize in?
Obviously, romance, since this is the community that we're in. To break it down, I really enjoy contemporary and sports romance specifically. I do a ton, though. I would say most of my work is paranormal and fantasy in that realm. Just you grow up in that and as a kid reading Harry Potter, and you can't not love that for the rest of your life. So those are where I spend most of my time. But being in journalism, I have a lot of nonfiction experience. My grandfather's a historian. My first books that I really got my hands on nitty gritty are all historical fiction and nonfiction. So I've touched in a lot of bases, but I would say those 3 would be my bread and butter.
Jeanette asks, what's your typical lead time for writers who want to use your editing services?
Lead time. So typically I would prefer a new author to do a sample. This sun just really came through. Hi, I'm whitewashed
You no
now.
longer look angelic. You look like you're in the 7th
Exactly.
circle of
Now I look like
hell
a
and you're on
ghost.
fire.
I'm gonna scoot back a little from my computer. Um, so usually I have them do a sample edit. Sample edits. It just depends on how busy my schedule is. I am currently booked solidly through April, and then I have bookings all the way in through September. And so usually if I get a sample, one of the questions in that form is, when's your publish date and what are you looking at? And that's usually how I base if I'll even take on that sample edit, because I don't want to waste your time. If my editing schedule doesn't match your publishing schedule, then keep me in your back burner for next time. But if I actually book a project and everything is based off of word count, I would say in general, though, I take a week and a half to 2 weeks for my copy editing, line editing, proofreading. I offer an abbreviated service on my website. I call it the final read through. Usually that's after you've done proofreading with somebody else and you're really at your final stage and thinking of it as an advanced ARC read, kind of like, or an enhanced ARC read. And that only takes me like 3 or 4 days to get through, and focuses mostly on like glaring obvious errors, missed words, mispunctuation, or inconsistency in character or lore, because that's obviously extremely important. So
Cool. Thanks. So and if someone were wanting to work with you, they're looking at least May at this point for next year.
Correct. Yes. If somebody wanted copy editing, I can do. So that final read through service is something that I take a few of those on a month, regardless of my line editing, copy editing, proofreading schedule is pretty rigorous, and I only take on so many of those a month. However, that final read through service I offer is something that I can do in addition to, and I usually take on quite a few of those. But if you wanted something in depth and nuanced, it would definitely be you're looking at May and June.
Cool. Thank you.
Mhm.
Other questions? No?
I'm going to, before you close this out, Danica, I'm going to copy and paste this form. So if people wanted
Thank
to look
you.
at it
Perfect.
and
Thank
read
you.
through.
I'm trying to think of any questions that I have had. Thank you for the form.
And for posting that form, use it as an author, use it as when you're editor shopping. These are goals and things that you should look at. Use it as a self-editing guide. I'm creating one of those, but that's a good place to start. And then also just those should be goals and things that you should be thinking out for yourself as an author. And if you're an editor on here, take it and use it whatever you want. I don't feel proprietary about it. I would really like people to be really conscious about how they're editing and how they're looking at authors and their writing.
Cool. Well, I would, thanks so much, Colette. You're writing a self-editing guide. Just tell us a little bit about what that's going to be. That's very exciting.
Yeah, it's going to be something that I just offer for free as a PDF on my website. And so, but basically, as I'm going through, I find that everyone has their preferences of how documents are delivered to them and what those documents look like. And it focuses on minor formatting, obviously not publishing formatting, but minor formatting things that you should be looking at when you're presenting it to any editor, ways that they would prefer to be looking at that document. And then going through and talking about different, like a lot of people edit in or work in Microsoft Word. Their editing tool is actually pretty sufficient as far as catching minor things that that you could catch yourself. And so I encourage people regularly use that tool. It's not the same as using other software that are on the market right now that rely heavily on AI and do that beta thing and try and change your stuff. Microsoft Words is very safe. And you can change your preferences in there to talking about if you have a formal style, a casual style, etc. And then when you're going, I'm trying to be really in depth about it, but talking about what your first draft looks like and how you're doing that. And then when you're coming back through to your second draft, what goals you should be having when you're doing that. And then finally, after that second draft, where are you going with that? And then what you should be looking at as your self-editing going through there. Microsoft Word is hard for sure. And all of the final steps. So I don't know how long it's going to be. I feel like it'll be pretty helpful and in depth. But that's also a little bit of a back burner because like I said, I'm booked
Busy.
really solid right now.
I
So
love that.
it's coming along, and as I learn more, I add to it. So
Fantastic. Thank you. It was
thank
so much
you.
fun getting to know you before this conversation, and you absolutely delivered great value. So I really appreciate you
Thank
taking
you so
time
much.
and having the courage to come and share all this. I know that, we writers and editors tend to be a little bit less on camera. So I really appreciate you coming and doing that with us. So yeah, happy 2024 to you and all the books and millions of words. Let's see, if you only started, you probably are going to be editing 2 million words in the next year, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm really excited to see where that's going to be, where that's headed for me, because I keep weird, I'm a little type A and I keep track. I have my little editing journal of everything that I did, and I just couldn't. I feel so blessed and so fortunate to have just to be so new, but to have had such a strong jumping off point and to have authors care enough about me to help teach me as we go. And then pointing me in directions on to where to learn more about novel editing versus my formal background in journalism. And I've been so fortunate. I've been really grateful. And especially to you, Danica, I've enjoyed the people in your community, getting to know people and talking to them as well. It's just been a really humbling and really great experience.
Oh, fantastic. I just love, yeah, it's relationships, right? That's why, I don't know, romance writers and building relationships and connecting, it just works, doesn't it?
It does.
All right. Thanks for watching. Thanks for coming out to everyone who came out live today and for your questions. And I hope to see you over in the Author Ever After community. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.